Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next stage. I'm so excited to be here with all of you tonight. My name is Rebecca Wallace. I am the marketing director at City Lights, and I also host our series, our streaming and video series, The Next Stage. And it's been a couple months since we've been back, and here we are. Yay! Tonight, we will record this event because all of our next stage broadcasts are available to watch later on YouTube. So if you're feeling shy and you want to have your camera off, that's okay. Camera's on, camera's off. We'll monitor the chat. So if you've got questions in there, that's great. The one thing I wanted to ask is if there's anyone here tonight who has not seen the show and is concerned about plot spoilers, because we will be extra careful for you. If you have not seen the show yet and you think you're going to, maybe type something in the chat and let us know. I see a lot of you in the room have already seen the show or have worked on it, so we might be okay, but if that is a concern, do let us know. I'm excited to be here tonight. Waiting for next is the beautiful world premiere play by Jeffrey Lowe that's on stage now at City Lights. We have just one weekend left on the stage. We run Thursday through Saturday at 8 and Sunday at 2. And it is also possible to watch the show. Thank you. Carol mentions in the chat. I watched the recording of the show yesterday. Love it. We have a beautiful professional recording that was made of the show during a live performance, and it is available through June 30th. And so that's something that you can buy a ticket to online, just as you would buy an in-person ticket. Some recordings of shows, sometimes they vary. This one is awesome. It's multi-camera, it's very professional, very well done, and it really captures the energy of the show right down to the curtain call, which is one of my favorite moments in the show. So I definitely recommend it. I am going to introduce our folks who we have on tonight, and then I've got a little slideshow with some of our favorite production photos from the show, as well as backstage shots of the making of the show. I am going to say I'm so sorry that actor Max Tachis is not here with us tonight. He's got a good reason, though. His baby will not go to sleep. So he and his wife, Ronit, are struggling a bit to get the little one down. So he might jump back in. We'll see. But those of us who are parents, we definitely understand. Oh, someone else in the waiting room. Let me let you in. Hello and welcome. I could say that Jeffrey Lowe needs no introduction, but I really do need to give him an introduction, so I will. He is a playwright, he is a director, he is an educator. He's gotten a lot of great press lately. If you've been reading the Chronicle or the Merc or the Metro, you've seen some fantastic profiles about all the projects he has going right now. He has worked all over the Bay Area and beyond. He directed City Lights' production of Viet Gone that we just had previously, and before that he directed it in Sacramento, so he's kind of all over the place, which is awesome. His plays have been produced and workshopped at Berkeley Rep and Theater Works and many other theaters, and he's also an educator and advocate for issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. We have director Leslie Martinson, has directed this production and also previous incarnations of the show as it was being workshopped. Theater Works Silicon Valley is her artistic home. She has been part of the artistic leadership there for many years. She is a veteran casting director and director. Some of the shows she directed at Theater Works are the 39 Steps and the world premiere of, and I don't know this show, but I want to know it, The Four Immigrants, an American Musical Manga. I want to see that. And Wes Gabrillo is one of our wonderful actors. He is making his City Lights debut and Waiting for Next, but he's worked at many Bay Area companies, including Palo Alto Players and Hill Barn, Crowded Fire, Theater First, and I wish I'd seen you in Eurydice because I love all the photos of you in Eurydice at Palo Alto Players. Such a beautiful play. And Max, who is not here, you will probably have seen him if you were a City Lights fan. He's been in many shows at City Lights, including The Elephant Man, Handle with Care, Ideation. I could go on and on and on and on and on. And he's also a playwright. His play from the Files of Denmark Metro was the very first program here on the Next Stage during the early days of the pandemic. We had a reading on Zoom, and it was great. So we are going to talk about the evolution of Waiting for Next, how it came to the stage, what our favorite moments are, all that kind of stuff. Before we get started with the conversation, I'm going to pull up a slideshow. Carol on our marketing team made a slideshow of some of her favorite Waiting for Next photos. They're a lot of fun. Please enjoy. I love that last one. I have so many favorite images there. They're just really beautiful. Our company photographer is Christian Pizzarani, and he did a beautiful, beautiful job with all these photos. So, and thank you, Carol, for putting that together. I saw some smiles. Wes, I love that close up of you. It's just, oh, it's so beautiful. It's a beautiful shot. Not to embarrass you, I say that every
No, that's right. Contrasted with the, of course, elation of
of
graduation
graduation.
gown.
Yeah, and then the one where Max is holding the umbrella over you during a sad moment in the play. It's really lovely. There's so much pure emotion. I haven't heard anybody say that they're concerned about plot spoilers, so I think we can probably talk about everything we want to talk about. Well, Jeffrey, will you start us off with some backstory about this beautiful play and the momentous meeting at Phil's Coffee that I love hearing about?
Yeah, well, so what's so fun about the play and really on theme for the play is that more often than not, when many writers write, or certainly when I write, like I'll start with like an idea or a theme, or I'll think of a scenario that I can't quite shake for a play. But in this one, the scenario that I couldn't quite shake was, oh man, I really love working with Wes Gabrillo on putting on plays. And man, I really love working with Max Tachis on putting on plays. And we should all just do it together. And maybe if we're lucky, people will pay us to just like hang out together because that's what we want to do anyway. and so and so that was sort of a nugget that I had, because I forget exactly what it was in the timeline of things, but I think that I had just more worked back to back on shows, one with Max and one with Wes, and I was just thinking about how what an amazing long-term friendship I've had with both of them, and just how like it's so wonderful to direct them, and just sort of like the shorthand that you gain with certain artists that you work with, Leslie being one of them, being her assistant for many years. And so then it was just sort of ruminating in my head, and they actually hadn't worked together before, and then I was like, oh, I need to remedy that, they should work together. And then at this time, Max was working at Philz Coffee in Redwood City, which is where the TheaterWorks offices are. And at this time in my life, I was very rarely paying for my coffee, because on my way to the office every day, I'd stop by Philz and they would know exactly what I was getting. Actually, Max Tachis and Taylor Sanders, who's also a City Lights alum, both worked at this Philz Coffee. So one of them was usually there, and I would rarely pay for my coffee. And then there was a point where Taylor stopped working there, and then I was at City Lights with the coffee in hand. It's like, oh, is that an iced new Manhattan, sweet and creamy? And I'm like, how do you know my coffee order? And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, because you used to make my coffee every other day. But I was really freaked out for a second, like, well, how did you know? But anyways, I was going to Phil's and I was getting my coffee, and I'm just like waiting in line, and I'm with Max. I'm like, hey, so I have this idea. You know Wes? He's like, yeah, like Wes is great. Like he's seen him act before, and Wes has seen Max act before. And I'm like, I think I have an idea for a play where like the people will just like let us hang out together, because we should just hang out together, and I'll be right back. And so then after that, at City Lights, there was an opportunity to do a night of 10-minute plays, and I wrote what was now the first scene of the play. And what is fun about that is I got so excited hearing these two guys read the first scene of what was going to become a full-length play. We had maybe 4 rehearsals scheduled for this reading of a 10-minute play. And I think on the second rehearsal, when they were prepped to, rehearse that scene that I brought, and I said, I know we're here to rehearse this thing for City Lights, but I already wrote the second scene, which was the prom scene. I'm like, just for fun, can we just read it? And it had nothing to do with what we were actually scheduled for, but then I just like kept writing. And then I already knew that this was going to go to like become this full-length piece. So what's really cool is on theme with it, this play started with a real life friendship with people, and sort of the desire to create art with people that you love. And then as the play started to grow, the original nugget for the idea was a play about 2 people who we find at various stages in their life waiting for something. And then, like with many plays, as we were going on and we were developing it with different directors and other people, like we start to discover more and more what the play is actually about. And like, for example, one really great example of that is, I would say that nobody would deny that one of the greatest and biggest themes of the play is the theme of fatherhood and future fatherhood. And I promise you that wasn't originally the idea. And there was just a point where I was sitting with Leslie as we were getting prepped for our second to last reading before we got to this production. And she goes, this play's really about fatherhood, isn't it? And I was like, oh. And then I thought about it. I'm like, oh my God, it really is. And then that helped me fix one of the scenes that we were having a lot of trouble with, was the scene that then became the scene where Marcus was deciding he needed to have a divorce with Sage. He needed to leave Sage. And I was never quite finding the right tone on that scene. Everyone, if you're not going to hear spoilers, but you're going to hear a lot of different versions of what this play used to be. So the very first version of that scene, he was like falling in love with another coworker, but that never felt quite right. It felt a little too easy to like, oh, he's falling for somebody else. And then there was a point where he was just falling out of love with her, but it was sort of a little half-baked an idea. And then when there was that realization through Leslie's dramaturgical eye, and I always steal on my first day of rehearsals as a director, I'm like, we're going to do it Leslie Martinson calls, we're going to English major this play. And so Leslie was English majoring my play, and she's like, this is really about fatherhood. And then it hit me that I'm like, oh, a reason someone might hold on for so long to a marriage that they might no longer want to be in is because they don't want to, they've sort of logicked their way into thinking that they're going to fall into a bad habit of an example that they didn't like. And for Frank, that was the example that his father led. And so for me, it was one of those things where we were just like trying to inch our way towards a scene that wasn't working. I was never happy with that scene. And then at the end of the day, it's actually, I think, one of the strongest scenes we have in the play. And I remember when we landed on what the scene is now, I came into the first rehearsal of that reading really excited about the scene, and it didn't work. I was like, dang it. I came in so cocky. I'm like, you guys, I fixed the scene. And everyone's like, yeah, cool. That was fine. It was okay. And then we talked about it more and more and more. And then what the scene was going to become, which is what you all know the scene to be, sort of clicked in my head. And I did that thing with like, I'll be right back. And like, you guys work on a different scene. And I left the room for like 45 minutes. And I come back with printed pages and we read it and it super, super worked. And I was like, oh my gosh, like we found this together, the four of us as a group. And I just remember what one of the nicest things Max said to me. I'm like, so what do you guys think of the scene? And we all felt like it was working. And Max just goes, I just can't believe you wrote that 45 minutes outside of this door right now. And it was like one of the proudest things that someone's ever said to me. but anyways, I went too long, Rebecca. You want to talk to the other two as well. I rambled. I love working with all of these people.
No, you gave us a great taste of what it was like all working together, and obviously you are the playwright, but what a team effort this has been, and the genuine friendship and respect and love that there's been in these rooms. And I want to say, how many rooms were they like? How many times has this play been performed in workshop? Because I think some of us don't know the whole process of how a new play gets workshopped. You had an early reading at City Lights, I remember that, and there was one in LA. Like how long was the process, and then when did Leslie come in? Because Leslie, you weren't there at the very beginning, right? You came in later. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that. Anyone can jump in.
I'll say Leslie wasn't there at the very beginning as a director, but Leslie was like there from the beginning. Because like I knew I was having a reading, and I'm like, Leslie, you are a very busy person, but it would mean the world to me if you were there for this reading of this play. That means a lot to me. And she was like, for sure there. And she for sure was already giving her sort of her wonderful guidance, and we were lucky to have her as a director. But I'll let others answer sort of the journey.
I will say that, am I sounding okay?
Yeah, you sound fine.
I will say that there was certainly that first scene as Marcus and Frank at 12 at City Lights, that was presented at City Lights. And I think there was another time, Jeffrey, at a what was really cool event. That's where that you saw the opening Polaroid of Max, Jeffrey, and I. That was a different event where I think we did an additional scene, and then we came back to City Lights a third time. This is when Leslie was brought in to do the reading for that. So if we count that, there was one for a literary review organization in Los Angeles, SF Playhouse, and that's when we had Giovanna directed there, and the Dragon. I mean, there was the theater works that space there. I pardon me, I don't remember the name of the space, but I can't. And also the Newark Festival where we did a live. What was that called again?
Like an open rehearsal.
Open rehearsal, which was fascinating, and I mean that's at least 6 different phases and spaces where we did the reading. Each one giving, I think, a little more into that process and the development of this play and really this journey. So I think it in my career at least, it's been such a unique experience, and then to have it come back to City Lights. And I've been telling folks, some patrons and friends, that like Max being the mainstay of City Lights and me making my debut, it's just sort of, there's a lot of things that sort of like as a balance and or a full circleness to this that feels just so right, especially coming at world premiering at this particular time. We're all sort of coming our way back to the theater. So yeah, I'd say 7 or so times it's shot in the dark, but quite a bit.
And over about 6 years. So.
Yes, yeah.
One of the things we were looking at the open rehearsal that people may not know if they didn't see it earlier is that, so each of the scenes in the play, they're a different age, but they didn't used to be in chronological order. It used to jump back and forth. And one of the things that we were looking at in the open rehearsal was what do you learn if you see the future before you see what led to the future, and how it goes. So the very last scene, the graduation scene where they're 18, that's always been last. So there's always been at least that jump. And we even had a framing device that we cut about 3 days before we opened at City Lights, which I give Jeffrey great credit for doing. And Miranda, our stage manager, is here, and she had to deal with a whole Q series that we just said, you know what, we don't need it. And by then you've made design choices. There's costumes that were based on the fact that they had to be wearing a certain thing at the beginning, which they didn't have to wear anymore.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, that was interesting. I was like, oh, the prologue's cut, preset list change, those cues are gone. You know, it was, yeah, I was like, okay, we're going to cut it. Let's just keep, and then I think the show, we didn't have that jump back because it started when they were 40. Yes. They were 40. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 30. Yeah. And then going back, and yeah, it worked. I just, okay, different, and it made some things a lot easier for sure. Just because those changes didn't happen.
So there was originally a prologue where they were older.
Prologue.
And then you said, and so then the version that we've all seen on the stage is they're 12 years old, and Max comes vaulting.
There were about three pages. I think it wasn't a ton, but it set up things a little differently.
I cut it like a real goober too. I waited for them to tech it. It was like they finished teching it, and I literally, like, once they were done and moving on to the next scene, like whispered a lesson, like, maybe we don't need that prologue that we just spent 45 minutes getting ready to go.
Wow. Well, see, now that is a testament to, and this is I'm pointing to her like this is where she is on my screen. Miranda Whipple is our stage manager, and you've seen her on the next stage before, also as a props designer. So we're thrilled to have her here tonight. So yeah, that is a testament to Miranda and everyone on the team about how flexible you are as artists, that you just...
Designers were wonderful. There were, it was like, great, we'll just get rid of those cues and starting, how different, and they were wonderful to work with. I had a great time with all the designers. Some I've worked before in different capacities, and it was great. Yeah. Really great shout out to them. Yeah.
Dan has a question in the chat. Thank you, Dan. At what point during the development process did you come up with the play's title, and were there other titles you considered?
No, and that doesn't always, does that always happen? I'm about to make something up.
Jeffrey, you did have, I just made interject before you finish your thought. He did have for the one act, which was the opening scene, which was presented at City Lights. It was called, and in the literary review, it was called something else. So I'll let you.
Yeah, when it was just a 10-minute play in the first scene, it was called Where I'm From. And then, but that was never going to be the title of the full length. But pretty early on, once like the second scene was written, it was always called Waiting for Next. I was about to say that doesn't always happen. I always change the titles to my plays, but I think I've only changed like the title of like 2 of my plays, and one of them was because I got a cease and desist letter from.
Oh, you must tell us that story.
Oh, OK Cupid somehow caught wind of my play that had OK Cupid in the title, and now I have to have a disclaimer on every single piece of marketing of that play if it's ever done. It's a whole thing.
Oh my goodness. These are the backstage things that we don't usually hear about.
Made me feel like I made it though. I got like the cease and desist letter from like this big tech company.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the play was always called Waiting for Next, especially because until, as I was saying, we discovered a lot more of the more deeper themes of the play. The first piece of it was the theme of waiting. And what I was sort of, a lot of times in a lot of plays, I sort of reflect upon something that I can't shake in terms of how I'm feeling. And I was getting really nervous about my sort of attitude about my own life, where I'm like, oh man, I'm always like feeling like dissatisfied, like I should be doing more, or something better should be happening to me. But like if I was like coming from like like if I was coming at it from a third party perspective, I would tell anybody that was living my life to be like, you should be like super like proud and grateful for your life. But like for me, I wasn't feeling that. And so I felt like I'm always waiting for my life to start, but then like I'm 30 some odd years old and my life is in fact going. So then the play title Waiting for Next sort of came to me. But yeah.
Nice. I can't even imagine it called anything else. So I guess that's a compliment. Oh, I did not know that about the prologue being cut. Were there other ways that the play has changed along the way that might surprise us? Like, oh, did you know that Marcus was actually this, or Frank was actually that? To put you on the spot.
Well, there's a scene that we call scene 8.5, which we actually teched before he'd finished writing it. So Wes had to learn that scene and put it in space basically in the last couple of days before we open. And that's the scene where he's in the future and he's using his Google Glass and a heads-up display. And we knew there was going to be a thing there, so we kept going, well, there'll be a scene, and Jeffrey was doing some other things. We're like, he's got an idea, he's gonna write it, and then we'll rehearse it. So at some point we're like, well, you'll be sitting here and these lights will be on you, and this is how we'll get in and out of that scene when he's written it, and then we'll go ahead and do it. And it was actually, they were both in it, and then we cut Max.
That's right, yes. And full disclosure, I was happy to quote unquote wait for the I have worked on new developments before, and of course for Jeffrey, for Leslie, for the production, for the story, happy to do that. And talking with Jeffrey and Leslie about it, about what that particular scene 8.5, as we called it internally, but yeah, the Google Glass heads-up display dating app thing just kind of allowed us to get some insight into what happens after Frank removes his wedding ring. You know, in the couple scenes prior, we see him at the birth of his best friend's baby, but it's like, hey, what's going on with Frank? And we a little bit more is revealed in the subsequent restaurant scene. And he's clearly in this uncharted frontier, uncharted territory of like, I'm 38, 40 years old and having to date again. We, at the end of it, of course, discovered that he was looking to adopt as a single parent. So it was a nice little discovery in that moment too.
You know,
Yeah,
and
that was lovely.
the cool part about the play development, especially for this play, but I mean, maybe, I don't know how other playwrights work, but for me at least, what I've loved is like, so many of the ideas start off as one thing, and then what we land on is something totally different, but so amazing and lovely. So like the original nugget for 8.5 was like, we sort of, for the journey of this play, it sort of pendulumed back and forth. For like in the very first draft, like the whole thing was just a hoot. It was just a bunch of laughs, and boy, was this hilarious. And like, what a good time we had. And then as we were going, well, one, the very first full reading that we did, we realized as a group, me, Wes, and Max, that I was, one of the benefits of writing for Wes and Max as people I know very well is I'm like, oh, I could write these jokes that I know that they're gonna slam dunk every single one of these jokes, and I just know exactly their cadence and how they work, and it's gonna be a grand old time. When we were rehearsing it, we couldn't breathe because the three of us were just laughing our butts off. And then the audience comes in, and they're hearing this all for the first time, and we realize, oh no, they don't know when they should laugh as a group, because they find everything kind of funny. So then we had to be like, this is an A laugh, a B laugh, a C laugh, and we had to like sort of shed things. So like in volleyball, we knew when to set things and who was slam dunking what. So then the audience can have sort of this communal laugh, as opposed to like the three of us just giggling for 90 minutes. And so then the play became more serious, and it became about like as they were getting older, we started to find sort of the depth and what the play really was about, and it became like a real thing rather than like just this fun sketch for 90 minutes. And then what we were trying to go for with scene 8.5 was like Leslie was pointing out, like, oh man, we go from prison to divorce to baby being born. That's like three really heavy scenes in a row after we start with some laughs of childhood. So it actually started off with us being like, well, let's break the structure up a little bit and get us another monologue in there, and then let's also get us a couple more laughs in before we get to the sort of final scenes of this play. And that was the nugget of it. So then I'm like, we came up with the idea of Wes, Frank doing the online dating thing, and then we were trying to solve the problem of, well, we can't just have him staring at a phone the whole time because that's not interesting. So then we did the Google Glass thing, so then he could be looking at the audience and we could have the projections. And then out of nowhere, as I'm thinking about the beginning, middle, and end of what this like small scene was going to be, I just text Leslie out of nowhere, like, this is crazy. But like, what if the scene ends with him realizing that he's gonna try to adopt? Like him wanting to date is not actually the only choice for him to find the fulfillment he's looking for. And his end game, what was so important to him the whole time, he was never talking about, oh, I'm going to get married and do this, or I'm going to find love and I'm going to do this. Throughout the play, he kept talking about how he was going to be as a father. I'm like, so what if this ends with him like hating dating, but he's going to start the steps towards adoption? And then I said, is it crazy that I'm not going to write a scene about it? He's just going to say it, and then we're just going to leave it there. And then like so many things in the play, it now, like, I feel like I can't imagine the play without it, because I love that although by design Frank starts the play very grounded, but like ends the play in a much more fractured state in terms of his life. We know the journey that he's trying to go on, and we know the steps he's going to take, but it's not like it's just left a mess. Like, he's still moving forward towards something. And then Marcus has sort of the reverse journey where he's sort of all over the place as a kid, and then he ends in a more grounded place. But they're still friends and still going throughout all of it. But Leslie, you had some really lovely things to say about like sort of your reflection on Frank having this adoption journey at the end of the play.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've covered it, that we've also just wanted a texture change, that there were sort of naturalistic, heartfelt scenes, boom, 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 and that wasn't the only language this play could could speak in. And I do get a little tired personally of the trope of like marriage is somehow the end of the story, even though all three of these guys have gotten married in the course of, or are about to get married in the course of working on this play. That we know that's not the end of something, that's the beginning of something. So what was a way to keep it open, that there were still next things coming? And as we'd figured out, obviously friendship is how the play moves, but this responses to fatherhood, their father being a father, is almost the plot of the play with an episodic play like this. And so this gave us another, what if you choose to be a father, and what would that be about? And it also meant that we could keep it open at the end, that they're not done. They get the scene in the restaurant, and life keeps going. I mean, there were early times when I'd have to say, as the only person over 35 years old in the room, I would like to explain to you that's not how that works. Just when it came up, but the play has gotten deeper as Jeffrey's worked on it, and deeper for Wes and Max as their lives have progressed. You have a play like this where they're only the right age for one scene by definition, no matter what age they are, and it's just sort of moved what age that is, but really found deeper resonance now that they've made progress through some of those life stages, you know. Oh, I'm seeing things coming in the chat there too.
Lauren
Yeah,
Gorski from the
Jeffrey
Exposition
Miller.
Reviews in the house. She's here. They were the group in the literary magazine in Los Angeles
Yes.
that hosted us. Yeah, thanks
Oh,
for
Road
being
trip,
here.
the famous road trip.
The famous road trip where the Steph Curry, the baby Steph Curry jersey got booed when we did the reading in Los Angeles.
I didn't remember that.
It got booed.
On a flip side, Max, Jeffrey and I, with the exposition review team, did find a more casual eatery on our last day before we drove back to the Bay called Home. As you know, that's Marcus's restaurant. He opens at the end, that incorporates Frank's mom's famous homemade dinuguan dish. So that was a cool little nugget there too. I should have said that. I don't know if Carol got that, but I should have said that to Carol, because it's the three of us in front of a real life restaurant called Home. So.
And wasn't that also when they got to eat dinuguan made by your mom?
That's right. Yes, that's
and
right.
And now the dinuguan in the show, the actual prop is made by Jeffrey's mom.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah,
That's right.
I was just going to say that. And if Max were here, I had asked Max about his first time, because I have a picture of him holding a bowl of dinuguan, and it's something that your mom made, Wes. And I said, was that the first time you tried it? And he said, oh yeah, when we were down there in LA, I believe you stayed with your
They
parents.
stayed with me and my folks. Yeah,
and
exactly.
Max said that basically your mother fed him the entire time.
She said, just keep eating. Yeah, you're gonna like it.
We had like 5 meals a day, because also the wonderful people at Expo Review were like, oh, we're gonna take you out to dinner, and we like told Wes's mom that, like, oh, they're taking us out to dinner and they're taking us out to brunch. It's like, no, but I made all this food for you. So we ate before we were on our way to eat somewhere else. It was so much eating.
And I don't know if you all heard what Leslie said, that the dinuguan in the show, the prop, is actually made by Jeffrey's mom. Does she just bring in a vat of it every night, or how does that work?
No, well, it's not a lot that he eats. So we brought a first batch and we froze it. And then we brought a second batch actually that came last week. And there's actually way too much, but like my mom just made a big batch. Like, we don't need this much, but Paulino eats it every night. So I'm like, Paulino, just take whatever you need to, Paulino.
And then our props designer, Christina Sturkin, parsed it out into every night show. So we just defrost what we need, and then the rest stays up in the freezer. But yeah, it's very tempting not to eat it every night. It's delicious.
I have a random story about that LA road trip that is like not relevant to making art, but there's just like 2 really funny stories that I just want to share with you all, so it doesn't just stay with us. So after the reading that went really, really well, we all went out to a karaoke bar with a bunch of folks. A bunch of my college friends came, and we went to this karaoke bar. And I believe, if I remember correctly, because we knew the most people, Wes and I were drinking and Max was driving that night. And
makes sense. Yeah.
we drove the rental car. It was like this big SUV from the Bay Area to LA. And then when we were leaving the place, we're like, oh, we need to put gas. So Max parks at the gas place, and then Wes, I think you were like, oh, it's my turn to gas up the car. I'll do it.
That's right.
But you met us in LA, so you didn't know how big the car tank was. So we're sitting there, and I'm sitting there a little drunk, but I'm looking through the audience response forms. And Max is sitting there. We're just chatting about reflecting upon the night, reflecting upon the reading. And you're outside while Max and I are talking. And then we just hear from outside of the car after, like, I don't know what felt like the 30th minute of this gas being pumped into the car. And we just hear Wes, and excuse my language, we just hear Wes go, dang, just drunk. He's like, man, this tank is bigger than a motherfucker. And Max and I almost died. We couldn't breathe. We were laughing so hard. It was so funny. And then
you aren't feeling up right now.
Oh,
yes,
right,
exactly. Yeah,
it would have been even
forever.
More. And then when Wes comes back in, then I pull a random response sheet from the reading where someone writes. All it says is in response to the questions. It had nothing to do with anything. The person wrote, "Love is a lie. Beware the three-headed goat." That's all they wrote, and I was like, "Whoa!" At opening night of Waiting for Next, I get cards from folks and everything. It's all great, and I have a card from Max, and I'm like, "Oh, I've never gotten a happy opening card from Max before. I wonder what this is gonna say." And I open it, and all it says is big Sharpie letters, "Beware the three-headed goat." And I hadn't thought about that for like 4 years, and I literally spit my water in my kitchen laughing.
I have a funny story too. For those of you who are at opening night, you heard it, but Lisa Millette, our artistic director, was giving this great curtain speech. And Lisa is absolutely wonderful at many things, some tech things not so wonderful at. And so she was talking about how you can view the program by using a QR code. And she's like, yeah, you just do the QR code, bzz, QR code, bzz. I'm thinking QR codes don't bzz, but whatever, we'll just let that go. So then, Wes, why don't you tell them what
Yes, it's so, this is a testament to, as I'm sure many of you had seen Max on the City Light stage, just how good Max is as a scene part. He's clearly one of my favorites that I've gotten just to share the stage with. But I mean, this is a scene at the very end where he shows me his restaurant and he gives me this menu where I comment, it's a paper menu. And he's like, yeah, I hate when we all switch back to QR codes. And he goes, buzz, buzz, as a callback. Is this the story you're talking about, Rebecca? This
yeah,
is it?
Call back to
yes.
the curtain speech.
To the curtain speech that Lisa made live.
Like the timing was flawless. Like he said, I hate it when there's
Flawless.
a QR code, and then he kind of pauses and he goes, bzz.
Yeah.
And there was the most wonderful laugh from the audience because it was like everyone there was in on the joke. And that was the only night you were ever going to hear that joke, was because they were making a very nice fun of Lisa's curtain speech.
It was beautiful. It's a wonder I don't break all the time getting to work with Max and just what he does. He brings
so
it.
So funny. And for those of you who joined a little bit late, Max is so sorry he can't be with us tonight, but his little baby is having a lot of trouble going to sleep. And so he's sorry that he's not with us tonight. And I actually had a question I was going to ask both Max and Wes, but Wes, you'll have to answer for both. From an acting perspective, I love watching you guys go from age to age to age throughout the show. And you start off as 12, and Max does this great entrance where he comes in and he's like monkey barring on the set.
Yeah.
Tell us about sort of the physical preparation and the other preparation when you come in to play a 12-year-old and you kind of have to get into that mindset, and then you're an adult, and then you're this and that. Tell us about kind of the journey you take as an actor playing all these ages in one night.
That's a great question. I mean, that was, as Jeffrey mentioned, the first scene it kicked off with, and I reading it with Max for all these years and with music stands in front, actually trying to put even some physicality in front of it was fun too. I have a background doing children's theater, so that was this is a bit different too. And working with Leslie through this process, it was like, all right, are we bringing the audience into this world of like only 12-year-olds and we're seeing some of their moments play out? But actually it was fun to really get into that physicality of like the shiftiness, the awkwardness. it's an age where, you know, you're going through puberty, and everyone enters it at different stages, and what exhibits and what manifests is different. And the awkwardness, the sort of need to just break free. And they say that in the dialogue too, and all the curiosities and the earnestness. Sometimes the sort of the jokes, the sly jokes that come, the like yearning for things that suck, or the calling out of those things that like are sucky, just to wait for a parent who is only late because they're at work, like in Marcus's case. But I think it was just fun to just get to play and to really differentiate between 12 and even 18, right? I remember there was a great note that Leslie had us when we were finally in our prom tuxes, which, as you can imagine, we were not in any type of prom tux, be it oversized or ill-fitting, in any of the readings. So finally getting into it with the excellent design of our costume designer, Melissa Sanchez, just feeling like, hey, this is our biggest night, and the biggest night of our lives up to that point, of course. But just feeling slightly off from it. So it's how we sit, you know, it's still not how one as an adult may sit if they're wearing a suit. But how would an 18-year-old who's maybe only worn a suit one other time in their life sit in that? So it was such great physical work with the kind of questions Leslie brought to the table through every stage of Marcus and Frank's life. And 12 in particular was a lot of fun to get to do. And to start the show that way, I think it really did change, as we alluded to earlier when we cut the 38-year-old prologue to start the show.
Oh yeah, because when you start off playing these kind of restless, squirmy preteens, you start off with that kind of energy, so it gives the show kind of a bang at the beginning.
It does, yeah. And then especially into the next scene where we start to kind of bring the audience into the device of, oh, this is how we're seeing the actors, these storytellers, those actors embodying Frank and Marcus transition into each of these age groups, with, of course, the projections and the multimedia that's happening to kind of help uplift that. So that was a lot of fun. It's just a great way, I mean, with all the production elements combined, for not speaking specifically for Max, but I feed off his energy certainly, of just getting into the next scene from 12 to 18 in particular. So
I love watching the two of you, your physicality. It's so good. And I'm sometimes in the booth, I'm like, oh, they're extra bouncy tonight. And I say that to myself, because and especially when they're younger, I'm like, oh, they're really feeling it. And I mean, it's always something different when the 12-year-olds and what they're playing around with, and it's nice to watch. But yeah, I'm like, oh, and then they go back to 18 and I see it again. You know, it's wonderful to see. I'm like, oh, they're really feeling it. And you know, it's great to watch. And then I think, I don't know what day it was, but yeah, Max's collar was funny. And then you fixed it for him, Wes. And I was like, oh, he fixed it. And I was so excited. And because I was watching it, and I was like, it would be how an 18-year-old would have his tux, you know, and just kind of askew. And Wes fixed it. And I was like, oh, it warmed my heart.
The little things of ways the friend would look out
like he's looking out for
even
him.
Though he also equally hates wearing this thing too.
Exactly.
I'm so fish out of water here.
Yes.
But your collar is off. Let me help you out there, buddy. Yeah.
Exactly. It was great. Yeah. I don't know what that was last weekend sometime. It was wonderful. Yeah.
One of the first rehearsals that we did was to explore the physicality, because it was an interesting way to start a show where they've been working on it for 6 years. So normally you sit around the table and you talk about the themes. Well, we were up to speed in that sense. I mean, yes, we'd been off for a couple of years, but they'd explored the play more deeply than any cast has ever explored at the beginning of a play that I've worked on. But they'd been doing it in chairs with music stands. So physically, they hadn't done any exploration, just sort of because of the format. So after our first rehearsal, where we had to read through and design presentations and the typical things you do at the first rehearsal, we had 2 volunteers come in, and they put down their scripts, and instead they were each on a phone call with one earbud in and one earbud out to a volunteer who was feeding them the lines, so that all they were working on that night, obviously the timing was strange because there was this delay, but all they were working on is, what is the difference between 18 and 21, between 21 and 28? One of the interesting things that Wes and Max said to me after that was, it turned out to be a rehearsal about listening, because when you're holding the script, you see what you're saying next, and that the joke is always sort of yada, 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 my line. You know, that you just going, I'm sure I'm about to say something. What's my next thing? And this kid had no idea what their next thing was, but it was going to come in their ear just in time to do it. So it was a very interesting event, I think, for all of us to figure out how do we set down that stage reading and move into this full production. Wes, did you have a thought about from that rehearsal?
Yeah, I just like Miranda had mentioned, our stage manager, I loved it too, Leslie. Just, it was such a different way to approach it, given the fact that we were so familiar with the work. And to your last point, as you mentioned, having 5, 6, 7 years of being in the stage reading phase and development and workshopping the play, we needed to figure out in the subsequent rehearsals and working with you in this collaborative process to really thread each of those scenes. So not that each scene was a standalone, we're telling a greater story. So I think that also, that particular rehearsal helped set off that that energy and that sort of that spirit of like, how do we continue to use the transitions, but also the, hey, what did we learn of Marcus and of Frank in the scene that the audience had seen before? So I thought that was really well done, because we only, at least speaking for myself, only understood it as these individual scenes, yes, with each character, but to really thread it such that we see the whole arc of these 2 young men in their lives. So my baby's in the back. He's with grandma.
Speaking of fatherhood, Leslie, that sounds like a fascinating exercise. And what you said, and also what Wes said about the costumes, and call out to Melissa Sanchez, our wonderful costume designer. You didn't have those pieces all those years you were working on this, and then suddenly you're up and you've got physicality, you've got the costumes, and we all know as actors sometimes a costume piece can make a big difference. If you're wearing a rehearsal skirt, or you suddenly put on the character's shoes, and it changes your performance. What an interesting path you've all been on. I love this.
There was a moment, I forgot when it was, but I sort of forgot about that shift because we had been working on it for so long. But in the prison scene where Frank slams on a table, it's in the stage direction, he slams on a table, and we worked on the scene, and then Wes just sort of looks at everyone and was like, it's really nice to have a table. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, it's always been a music stand, and every time I slam the music stand, it almost falls. So I always like struggle with it. And now I have a table. And I was like, oh yeah, great.
Oh, before I forget, I just want to say, anyone who has questions who's watching, feel free to type them into the chat or turn your camera on, raise your hand, call out a question. Please do. You're most welcome to. This is fascinating.
It's a great solid table, I have to say.
It's a good solid table.
They are both very solid. And then the one, is screwed down, the one on the platform, because Max is just all over it, and you never know what he's going to do. So that one definitely needed to be affixed to the platform. But yeah, no, it's a nice slam he's got for that scene. So
we also designed the table to be extra tall so that adult men could swing their legs like little kids.
Oh, that's smart.
I had something I wanted to ask Jeffrey, or at least just mention. One of the things I absolutely love about the first scene, and you have it written so that Frank's character is Filipino American and Marcus's character is white. And Marcus is asking Frank, where are you from? Where are you from? And he says, well, I'm from here. Where are you from? And there's just this wonderful innocence about it. And the fact that he doesn't know, but he doesn't see anything wrong with asking, but then he gets embarrassed. Like, I love that scene so much. And I don't even know if I have a question. I love that moment.
No, I love that thank you for bringing it up. I think there was sort of like a lot of different purposes to that moment in the play to sort of open up some doors, where I think for me, I think there was some real value for us as a world to sort of watch this thing happen amongst children, because it's easy to sort of forgive children and not be like, oh, this person's a bad person, or oh, this is a microaggression coming from an adult, or anything like that. It's like, this is just children sort of learning and discovering. So like, in some ways it sort of can teach us as adults, but by watching through the innocence of 12-year-olds, a moment where people are sort of learning the first steps of American diversity in a lot of ways. Like all because when after Marcus asks his questions, Frank sort of goes step by step about his parents' immigration story in very simple terms. And Marcus just thinks about it, he's like, oh, that makes sense. And that's sort of the end of it. And then also like after he's embarrassed by it, then you sort of see the Frank character, the Filipino American character, then reach out with an olive branch to be like, hey, here's you know, you did ask me something insulting about whether or not we eat dogs, but like, here is something pretty wild that we do eat. It's pig's blood. It's dinuguan, which becomes like a theme throughout the rest of the play. And for me, it was really important to sort of have that in there to sort of give like this interaction where it's like, I worry that all of the ways that we're going to describe these interactions about us learning or figuring out how to live in a diverse world are either going to be only people who are 100% aware and down, or 0% aware and down and just dangerous racist people, when in reality we all sort of live in the middle and we're all trying to figure, I mean, not all of us, there's scary people, but many of us good people, most of us good people are all trying to figure it out. And so it was important for me to have that. And then also a question that a lot of folks have had at different points during different discussions we had was sort of the choice behind making Frank Filipino. Now, as the play developed, there was more Filipino-ness in the play, but it's by no means a play about being Filipino. It's a play where a character is Filipino and occasionally his Filipino background sort of creeps up as it does in people's lives. Like someone's like, yeah, why did he have to be Filipino? It's not a play about being Filipino. I'm like, well, I don't live every day of my life. I'm Filipino. I don't live every day of my life thinking about myself being Filipino. It comes up sometimes. I wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, I'm like, I'm still Filipino. And for me, there was a point where, like, as we said before, I started the nugget for the play was writing for these two guys. And initially, when I was writing the very first scene, there was a point where the idea for that section of the scene where Marcus asks him where he's from, that idea came to my mind and how I wanted to do it. And then I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So I'm now making a decision for the future life of this play. Like, am I going to make this Frank character Filipino? I know Wes is Filipino, but am I now making a decision that in the future of this play, that character is always going to be Filipino? And I found myself thinking about it. And then I realized that in sort of the challenging ways that some of us have sort of learned how to produce theater, that we're trying to unlearn maybe, I realized that the only reason I stopped myself to ask that question was because in my third hat, in addition to playwright and director, is as an arts administrator. And in my head, I'm like, oh, if I make both of these characters racially ambiguous, then perhaps this play will be more producible. It'll be easier for people to produce this play if I don't state what race or ethnicity they are and I'm not specific about it. And then after I had that thought, I got like mad at myself. I'm like, why did I have that thought? The reason I tell people I do theater is because I grew up in the world having very limited access to stories about Filipino Americans like me, and here I am stopping myself from doing it. So then, because I got mad at myself, I went into an act of defiance. I went from like, should I, to like, no, he's Filipino and no one's going to change it. No one's going to say otherwise. So that's sort of the different layers about that one chunk in that first scene of the play that you had, Rebecca. So thanks for mentioning that.
It's a lovely moment, and it feels like the true beginning of their friendship. Now, I know Leslie has to sign off, so I want to give her a chance to say goodbye, and then we'll, I think, wrap up after that. Leslie, thank you so much for being here. This was fascinating.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody. And it was just a pleasure to work on a play where the rhythms were really seated in the friendship among these three guys, that the rhythms of the way Wes spoke and Max spoke and the way Jeffrey puts together a joke. So it was a really enriching experience. We had so much to draw from. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, City Lights. One more weekend.
One more weekend.
Bye, Les.
I've got one more question for Jeffrey and Wes. And as I said, if anybody else wants to jump in, it's a quiet audience tonight, which is absolutely fine. I'm just glad you're here. Okay, so I got to ask, is there a sequel in the works? And whether or not there is, maybe I should ask Wes first. What do you think happens next for your character after the play ends? Have you thought about it?
That's a great question. I don't know about the sequel. I'll leave that to Jeffrey. Although,
of course, right?
To that point, like I would hope to still get to play Frank in the world premiere of the sequel if that happens. And what happens to Frank? I haven't thought about that. When like as was mentioned, he hates certainly the dating life that he's found himself in at that particular age, and I'm sure for anyone at that stage, it probably is probably also equally challenging or frustrating or probably great. You know, we don't quite know. But I think he found himself at a particular time in his life where he didn't think the world was his sandbox, his like ways to explore in so many different ways. And I think what he really found was this idea of yearning to be a parent, yearning to be a father, regardless if he had a life partner to do that with, and then regardless of the way that he had in his mind since age 12 or before then, in the next 20, 30 years of his life. So I would be excited to see what's in store for Frank, whether he lets more of his hair down. We don't quite know, but there is one thing for sure, that Marcus is going to be there. I mean, with a friendship that long, it's going to be exciting times, and maybe continuing to have some challenging times, bumps in the road. But as I am now closer to that particular age where we last see both Marcus and Frank, if this fellow Frank and Marcus were my friends, I would be excited for him if Frank was at that particular stage of his life, and would be eager to see what's to come next. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And as we've heard, you're a father. You became a father during this whole
process. I did. Yes, absolutely. As did Max. Yeah, I also have a 13-year-old stepson. So there's it's and I didn't anticipate it would. I've known him since he was 3 years old. Jeffrey and Max know him as Leslie, and he came to watch the show this last weekend. So life is a really beautiful thing, and I mean he enjoyed the show. I got to play a 12-year-old, and I was like, how did I do? And he's just like, it was cool, like just very chill, as a 13-year-old would say it. So
that is high praise from a 13-year-old.
Right, I would imagine. So so he got to enjoy it too, and so I'll leave with the fact that, like, as I know, we last see Frank at age 40, kind of in reflection on my own life in that journey, thinking about age 12, which feels so long ago. I would be excited, and there's one thing for certain: Marcus will be there, making him laugh every step of the way. So yeah.
Very nice. Thank you, Wes. What do you say, Jeffrey?
Is there a sequel? I don't know. There's a lot of ideas there. Like, I will say, like, thinking on that theme of waiting, as like very early in the pandemic, I kept joking around with the guys, like, well, maybe we should just write a Zoom scene where the guys are waiting for this pandemic to end, but like, we're still waiting. So I don't want to write that scene because I don't want to jinx it. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways it can go. Like, I thought about, like, there's the idea of continuing on in this structure of how the play goes, and going from like age 40 to however long we want to go. That was something that we sort of played around with. The joke that we had when I during tech, I was going through a tonsil, and I'm still going through a tonsil infection, but it was pretty bad then. So there was a couple of days where I'm like, I'm going to go home and rest, and I'll be back in a couple of days unless you want me back. And Leslie joked around, like, well, are you going to come back with Act 2? Like, she's like, you could just keep resting unless you're coming back with Act 2. And the joke that I had, so many Bay Area theater audiences will get this joke. I said, oh, well, if we do ages 40 through 80, we need to contract Lawrence Michael and Michael Champlin to take over for Wes and Max on Act 2 of the play. And so the two of them are already on board. Lawrence Michael, actually, you already hear his voice as the parent of Sage asking his wife Lali for the remote in Tagalog. Lawrence Michael from the Philippines, I gave him a line, asked him to record it, and he grammatically corrected my Tagalog. So thank you for that, Lawrence Michael. I needed that. I'm not good. And but I don't know. So that was a thought. George Pasaris, our wonderful sound designer, had joked around, like, what if we find out what's going on in between the scenes that we don't know about? I had the idea of, like, what if we had, like, what was going on with Sage and the various other women in Marcus's life was an idea that we had as another thing. And another idea I had was just, like, if we find one character or both of them in a different structure of play, is just sort of finding them in the play, in that, like, what is the play that is about? What is the family drama play, the dinner room table that maybe one of them goes through, or something like that. So I don't know that we're gonna do. I think I'm too young in my life to properly do the waiting for next sequel that takes on the same structure for the next 40 years of their life. I think that in the first drafts of this play, the last two scenes with the baby being born and them being at the restaurant at the end was already like, we already had to work hard because it was sort of disconnected for me. And then when we came in to do rewrites, we talk about how this play has sort of gotten deeper and deeper as we go. I mean, the scene in front of the hospital waiting for your child to be born is what changed the most, other than the brand new scene during this, because of the fact that it wasn't me, but Wes and Max were like, well, you know, like Leslie's like, as the only person above 33 years old in this room, Wes and Max are like, well, as the fathers in this room, this is how this goes. And this is the train of thought. And I'm like, no, please tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. And then we sort of evolved the scene as we were going there. A part of it really was the very early draft of that scene was really silly. And both Max and Wes were like, I'm having trouble navigating this because my child's just being born. And let me tell you, let me tell you what's going on in your head. I'm like, no, not jokes, because these jokes are very good. The other option for a sequel, though, is I have a lot of deleted scenes. Wes and Max knows them. I have, you know, the original version of the scene before it became the scene where where Frank decides that he needs to leave his wife. The beginning of that scene started with maybe my favorite joke I've ever cut. Like, Max delivered this joke and I just couldn't breathe. And it was really maybe the reason that scene didn't work for so long is because I kept trying to not cut the joke.
Yeah.
And then eventually I cut the joke. Okay, now I have to tell you the joke. The thing is that the joke doesn't have an easy punchline. And honestly, I wrote it, but I can't deliver it. Like, Max has to be here to deliver it. But essentially, it's about whether or not Marcus left his oven on at home. Basically, Frank is like, texts him, he's like, come over, I need you help. And Marcus rushes over and Marcus doesn't remember if he turned off his stove. And it was just the way Max did it was just so funny. And we had to cut it from the play. And I'm still sad about it. It's been like 5 years and I'm still sad about it.
And you later learn, just to add, in that same scene, is it the scene, Jeffrey, where we see this beautiful, excellent, hilarious, but also heart-wrenching monologue from Marcus, right? The wedding. We're waiting for Marcus, or we're waiting for Frank in his wedding day. He's sort of in the waiting room, and Marcus is there with him because Frank is anxious. He's waiting for his dad, but dad has yet to come. You kind of begin to learn. This is a whole scene. I think it was shifted or changed eventually to the monologue you see Marcus make, the practice his wedding toast, and we begin to see his problem with alcoholism. But I think Frank is feeling anxious on his wedding day, not necessarily for Sage, but because of this tumultuous thing that's been happening with his dad. His dad is not there, he's waiting for him. And Marcus leads them through this kind of really cool, like, mindfulness thing that we learned. Marcus has been reading a self-help book. Is that right, Jeffrey? Do you remember? I remember this scene
about so
vividly.
That scene. That's right.
And
yeah.
It's such a lovely thing because you see this young Marcus who is, in his own sense, dealing with, which may not even acknowledge the fact that he's been dealing with an early alcoholism problem. He's supporting his friend to, like, doing a visualization exercise of how do you imagine your life with Sage. And you know, we learn later that, of course, Marcus, after recovering and opening his restaurant, he's been seeing a therapist. But yeah, that's another deleted scene nugget there for the audience. So
the original prison scene was just Frank waiting for Marcus to pick up Marcus after a DUI. And then that evolved to waiting for Marcus from an Alcoholics Anonymous group that he was required to go to from a DUI. And then it evolved to something else as we wanted to sort of evolve the stakes and the seriousness of what was going on.
Sure. Hey, I've got a question in the chat. And then I think Wes has a question for you, Jeffrey. And I think probably after that, we're going to wrap up. So guys, if you've got any other questions, throw them into the chat. Dan wants to know, Dan brings up one of the things that I love about this production is the projected real life photos of cast, crew, and City Lights staff. We asked folks to contribute some of their favorite wedding photos, prom photos, pictures with friends. We've got our artistic director, Lisa, at her prom. We've got Carol at her prom. They're really, really sweet. How did you guys come up with the idea for, they're in between scenes, they're sort of transition, and they keep popping up on the screens. How did you guys come up with the idea to do that?
Well, I wish Leslie was still here. I could do my best Leslie Martinson impersonation on that, because she sort of brought it up to me, and I believe it was her idea. But one of the things, I'll start with this. So the idea to have these sort of collages of photos of our community members, audience members, friends, staff members, and artists working on this show. It was one of the things that we said was, that wouldn't work for every production. Like, I'm not putting it in the script that you have to do this, but it works so well for City Lights because of the heartful, soulful, community oriented organization that City Lights is. City Lights is so based on the community of artists and audience members and that interaction that's there. So in a play where it's about growing up, it's a coming of age story, and it's a play about us pulling our friends up from dark and hard places, it made sense to sort of have this inclusion of our community and our audience as a part of it, so they can see themselves through this lens, through this play. Now, the reason I say it wouldn't work for every theater, I'm like, it'd be a little odd if we're like at, I don't know, the Orpheum in San Francisco or at ACT, and they start putting random photos up when they have, like, 1,000 seats every night, and you're like, who are these people? But at a place like City Lights, you're going to know a lot of the people in your community here in San Jose and outside of it. So it was really cool to sort of allow another pathway for our audiences to sort of connect their lives with the story of these two gentlemen through those photos as they make their journey from ages 12 to 40.
And as Carol notes in the chat, they were just so much fun to watch. Very nice. Well, Wes, I think you are going to take us out. You've got one more question for Jeffrey.
Just to co-sign, I will definitely say, I put this in the chat just to say out loud, my experience working on this, my debut production with and in City Lights, and with the community, the production staff, and the creative teams, truly unrivaled. Clearly we all had our respective layoffs with theater and before coming back to it. In a sense, we all have our times coming back to it, and there couldn't have been any other theater I think I would have loved to come back to, and it's been such a joy. So thank you, City Lights, Becky and Lisa, certainly Ron, the whole team, Carol. And so my question is for you, Jeffrey, and I think it's a question you may have heard, and we discussed about it a bit. I guess even one of the themes that had surfaced in particularly this production of surrounding specifically male friendships, and what kind of service like with that. And we, in our interviews, or the interview with like Metro, or the ones that you've had with Chronicle or the Merc, really brought to light, like, oh, so this is a specific story. This is a story about two men through age 12 through 40, and what does that entail? Like, this idea of like friendships with men and the vulnerability that we see with that, and what does that actually like mean in the context of how we normally or are conditioned to feel and or navigate male friendships. Exactly. So if you just wanted to speak to that, I know there were some great points you brought up in the last conversation we both had about it.
Yeah, and that was a thing. What's cool is initially, I feel like I'm going to keep saying this, like, I didn't realize that this was going to be this. And then when I realized it, or I found it, I sort of started leaning into it and sort of whatever. But in a wonderful way, the play sort of mirrors or takes on the sort of tone and color of a lot of my friendships with people, and my friendships with men in particular. And unlike like a David Mamet play, say, like, I don't have any friends that are like David Mamet friends or Neil LaBute friends. Like most of those people that I've interacted with in my life, I'm like, oh, I can't be around you too much. It's too stressful. Like, I can't deal with that. So like most of my friendships are, especially the very deep ones, are sort of like that Frank and Marcus friendship that they have. And for me, I sort of, I don't know, I don't want to be too binary about it, but like in a lot of ways, like my life, I was surrounded by just like strong women, right? Like I said, like Leslie Martinson was my mentor. I have, older sisters, and most of the artists that I have assisted, a large number of them have been a majority women that have sort of been who I've watched and grown under. And so for me, I sort of haven't really identified with sort of the machismo of a lot of the aggression that you'll find in a lot of entertainment and storytelling that is sort of male dominated. And what I didn't realize when I was writing this friendship, like Jeannie Sakata, the wonderful playwright and actor Jeannie Sakata, her husband, he's a therapist. And he like came up to me after opening night. He's like, "Oh my gosh, if more of my male clients saw this play, I would have less clients." And I was like, "Oh wow, that's really wonderful." It's like these guys, like he's like, I was really taken by the moment in the scene where we keep talking about the scene, but the scene where Frank is deciding he needs to leave his wife, and he just says to his best friend, "I'm scared." And Jeannie's husband was like, "Do you know how long I have to work with clients for these men to just be okay with expressing to another man that they're scared of something?" And if we just have more representations of that, then we would all be in a better spot because we would realize it's okay. So that's something that's been really meaningful to me. And then the rapper and San Jose leader Damone Carter, he went up to me, and he's a wonderful rapper. And he went up to me and he's like, "Yo, Jeffrey, I think we're better for this. I think we're all better for having seen this." And it's something that like was just super meaningful to me, but it wasn't necessarily what I was going for. But it's so great to see that this sort of like we say, representation in a lot of ways. Like, City Lights is about to be doing Fun Home, so that representation about the complexities of the LGBTQ plus community, the representation of the Filipino community with Frank's character in the previous play with Viet Gone, the representation of the Vietnamese American community. Like, representation matters. And what is so wonderful to see is that, some people, some fragile maybe people will be like, "Oh, they're trying to like silence cis men or silence whatever people in the dominant culture," but that's not really it, right? This is a play that is written by a cis guy about two cis guys, and people are finding some meaning in it because it's not there's something there, and it's just about what we want, what we need. And the fact that they have emotions, they have feelings is so great. Now I'll also say in the text message thread that Wes, Max, and I have, which has, by the way, our text message thread has an emoji version of the handshake. So it's a wild little label for that text message thread. But one thing that we did comment on is just how many times people have commented that they expected these two to fall in love. And what I find so interesting about that, and I want to start with nothing wrong with it if they fell in love. That would be wonderful. That'd be great if they fell in love, if that was the sort of where they ended up. And also on my sheet of paper where I had like 50 different options for what these scenes were, that was an option. Was one of them going to fall in love? There was an unrequited love option there that was there. But one thing that I thought was so interesting was when we were reflecting upon it was, oh, it's so interesting that in this play where we have these men who express their feelings and support one another and are affectionate towards one another and are not shy to sort of be loving and friends with each other, that a number of people, because of how society has sort of programmed us, oh, we just assume that maybe they're gay. I'm like, it's not a problem if they're gay, but they don't have to be gay. People of any background, gender identity, or masculinity, or whatever, like, it's not a judgment on who you are to be able to express your emotions and be loving to people of any other background. And you don't have to fall in love with them. So it's been interesting. It's been an interesting journey to present that both in like wonderful ways and eye-opening ways, and then also the question of everyone just being like, maybe they fell in love. but yeah.
I thought about that in the marketing of the show too. Sometimes with some of the photos, I thought, I don't want it. I thought the same way. I was like,
Yeah.
how wonderful it would be if those characters fell in love, but I don't want to misrepresent the show. It's about going in a direction that it doesn't go. But I
Yeah.
didn't think about that. Yeah. I just saw mentioned in the chat. Someone said I saw Rebel Without a Cause earlier tonight, and the contrast of male friendships between that movie and Waiting for Next, very dramatic. Very interesting. Well, on that note, thank you for that. That was a really great question, Wes. Wes messaged me, said, "Can I ask Jeffrey a question?" It's like, of course you can. Bring it up. This has been fascinating. It's been, I first saw this play when it was a staged reading at City Lights, and I loved it then. I love it now. It's evolved so much, and it's been a real privilege to host it on our stage and at the world premiere. As Leslie pointed out, we've got one more weekend, so if you haven't seen it or you want to see it again, you want to tell a friend, please do, cltc.org. And thank you to our guests, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you, stage manager Miranda, for being here with us. This was fantastic. I will send Max everyone's love. I know I hope he got his daughter to sleep. Here's hoping. And we will be back on the next stage a little later this summer. As Jeffrey said, we're doing Fun Home. City Lights is doing Fun Home as a summer musical based on the graphic novel by Alison Bechdel. Wonderful show. And still deciding which artists are going to be able to make it on because it's a larger cast. But we'll be back here in the Zoom room, and I hope you'll join us. Thank you all. Have a great night. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you all. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, you all.
Thank you.